Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A you can't find anywhere else. It's April 2nd, 2025. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the CEO and founder of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator for AWS infrastructure that helps teams deploy their software faster. So if you're struggling to deploy or move faster on AWS, we understand and we can help fix that. Just go to cloudposse.com/meet, answer a few quick questions, and you'll book a meeting with me directly. So how can you maximize today's session? Well, first off, the format's very informal. You can engage as much as you'd like, ask questions, and if you're curious about any of Cloud Posse's open source tools like Atmos or some of our modules, this is a great place to ask. If you are listening to this recording on YouTube, you can join us live next time by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours. Now, I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's session valuable, share it with your team. You can just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse where you'll find a recording of today's session posted in a few hours. So with that said, let's see what I got on the announcements here. So first one was something interesting that I learned something about. If you've ever spent any time with DNS, you'll know there's lots of different types of resource records. The common ones that you're probably familiar with are like A records, which are for IPv4 addresses, TXT records, which is just for like metadata about a given host, or triple or quadruple A's, which are IPv6 addresses, and then CNAMEs and so forth. Another record that is been around for decades is the SRV record, which isn't really used that much today, other than maybe by some proprietary software that you might have installed somewhere. The SRV record is a way of, it's like the service discovery via DNS. It's a way you can, for a given protocol, basically ask for the port that is hosted on. Well, it turns out that RFC 9460 is a proposal for a new resource type of HTTPS, not to be confused with an SRV record. And it hasn't yet gained wide adoption. I don't believe it's fully supported by all the browsers, but it is supported now via feature flag in curl. So why should we care about this? Well, for example, lots of things are being done right now to optimize HTTP as a whole, right? With HTTP 3, we moved it from a standard text-based protocol to a binary protocol that is just a lot more efficient. We've talked previously on that on office hours. The other problem is how do you do service discovery for HTTP, and how do we move away from always requiring like that port, for example, to be on 80, or how do we discover where to get the HTTP content for a given host? That's what the SRV record, sorry, that's what the HTTP S record does, is you can retrieve the endpoints, the ports, all in one request, one round trip request, instead of multiple round trip requests, which is how it would work if you're using like SRV records, for example. Yeah, any commentary on this? Next link here was interesting. Obviously not good at the scale that GitHub operates, or that like CodeQL GitHub Actions are used. This absolutely must have been solved, but I think the overall risk was relatively minimal, and I'll cover that at the end. So some security researchers at Praetorian uncovered that the GitHub token was getting leaked in the artifacts created by the CodeQL GitHub action. And that's especially bad if you are using CodeQL on public GitHub repositories. And I'll get to the mitigations though in a minute and why maybe it wasn't that bad. So for those not familiar what CodeQL is part of GitHub's advanced security product. CodeQL is like the management dashboard and the APIs for submitting the serif files, which contain the static analysis format that any tool can produce. So typically you'll have security tools like Chekhov maybe that produce a serif file or some other tooling, and those you can upload with GitHub with CodeQL GitHub action to CodeQL. So what it's doing is under the hood, it's generating a serif file, and that serif file would be attached to a commit via executing the GitHub action. That file would contain the GitHub token. Now, keep in mind that that GitHub token is dynamically generated for the lifetime of the job, and then it's invalidated immediately after the job completes. So the researchers were able to show that for roughly 1 second, that token was still valid and could be used for exfiltration. And you could imagine that if that process was repeated somehow, then I guess you could add up those seconds and exfiltrate a little bit more information. But it's only whatever you can do for the duration of that request. So exfiltration would be the main concern there of like code in that repository. Now, I believe I'm not 100% sure that the ability to access, obviously, that artifact would have required it to be a public repo. So you're not really exfiltrating anything you couldn't have seen already since it was public. And if it was a private repo, you couldn't probably access the artifact or the repo itself to even get it. So first of all, that kind of takes away some of the severity right then and there. And then if that token had other elevated permissions, like you can set the permissions of what a token can do, that sounds scarier. However, if you're properly doing things like branch protections and repository rule sets, really the worst that could have probably happened with a token is that a branch might have been created or something was modified inside of that branch, provided that entire operation could be completed within 1 second. So that's my take on it. Curious if others have seen it or taken a deeper look at it. Here's an example of how the token was contained in the zip file that was created. All right, man, burning through my announcements here. Last one. So it's kind of interesting because OpsGenie just announced that they are sunsetting that product and moving everything into a net new product, which I forget what it was called. The writing was on the wall. I mean, Atlassian has been investing a lot in this other so-called product that I can't recall what it is, and that OpsGenie was going to be shut down. Well, Grafana now has reassessed some of the work that they were putting into OnCall. They're essentially managing 2 separate code bases, OnCall for their SaaS platform and OnCall as an open source product. And there wasn't a lot of in it for them to continue maintaining the open source offering for this. So they've made the decision that they'll be sunsetting the open source project. They encourage a fork to, materialize. I don't know that an official fork has been blessed or appeared. I think I've heard really good things about Grafana OnCall overall, but I don't know that there's enough of a community behind it that we can expect to see a fork appear, or at least a fork that has legs. It's very easy to create a fork. It's another thing to maintain it and innovate and get the word out there. So Grafana, if you're using Grafana on-call through Grafana Cloud, you got nothing to worry about. That product will be continue is where they're focusing their investment. Any thoughts on this one? Another interesting thing, if you that I wasn't entirely familiar with was 3 years ago, apparently Grafana, the whole Grafana, stack of products, Prometheus, Grafana, and Loki were relicensed as AGPL v3, which is of course one of those what do you call it? Like a viral license. Any product built on top of it is it requires that product also be licensed as AGPL v3, I believe.
I think Atlassian's product, I think is called Compass, if I remember correctly.
Right.
Right, that's their
That's
but
the Ops Genie.
yeah, I think so. But it's like all it's more than that. Like
Yeah,
it's basically like backstage plus that and everything that they're trying to put into like an entire product suite.
yeah. Which makes sense, rather than having 15 disparate products and trying to figure out how to get them to mesh together, bundle them as part of this. I think this makes sense if you are an Atlassian shop and happy with Atlassian products, but if you're not, I understand that too.
Does such a thing exist? An Atlassian shop that is happy with their products? I've never worked at one.
Yeah, yeah, still waiting, still waiting. Yeah, I think they should just go buy Jenkins or acquire that project somehow and wrap it in. That'll complete it, replacing Bitbucket pipelines with that. Where projects go to die.
Seems like a good fit.
Yeah. All right, let's see in the chat. What do we got? All right, all the bots complaining that they can't record the meeting. Because you guys screwed me. A few weeks ago, we lost our first office hour recording in like 5 years because I couldn't start the recording and the meeting said it was being recorded. All right. Any questions? This is the end of my announcements.
I I'll just say I noticed there's obviously been a lot of press around OpenAI and OpenAI becoming needing to become profitable, and they just did pretty much the largest tech, maybe it is the largest tech raise like ever. They
Oh, I
just
didn't see
raised
that.
$40 billion on a $300 billion post money valuation.
Wow.
Um, which means that they are now like the market cap of brands like Coca-Cola and Home Depot and those kinds of things. So it's pretty interesting how they will ever how they'll ever come whatever ever realize that valuation for anything like for their investors. So it's an interesting one.
Yeah, given how hot the competition is and what's the word I'm looking for? It's not ubiquitous is not the word I'm looking for, but as
Commoditized.
commoditized. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, AI overall is getting more and more commoditized.
Yeah. So, this basically means, so it says right there that, Gen AI is basically a market that's poised to top 1 trillion within a decade. But I think that means that for SoftBank, who led this round, and others to feel like this was a successful investment. They like OpenAI itself will probably have to achieve, you know, a market cap of somewhere probably near 3 trillion, in order for them to, to be able to say
Uh,
they successfully like exited. Like they're most are looking for somewhere around a 10x turn, on their, on their valuation there. So um, I don't quite understand how this all works, but it's interesting. Like because it's some like valuations that we're approaching here, they start to get too big for like almost anyone to acquire them. So the only thing they can do is go public and have their stock like be, give them some position where they're in that kind of range, which seems I don't know. It's
well,
extremely
definitely.
speculative. It's
Well, yeah.
extremely
Well, but
speculative for
that
how much they
so
have.
that is now so that's clearly put them as IPO or bust, right?
Yeah, like I mean, I mean, I guess presumably like Microsoft or Amazon could buy them. Google could buy them, but like those might be Apple could buy them. Those might be like the list though, like legitimately, like or maybe IBM, but even that it might be a stretch for IBM like at this point. So you just it is like from a private equity perspective, it's a tiny list of companies that could possibly buy them, and if they were to buy them, they're not going to buy them at the types of turns that SoftBank is going to be looking for on their investment. So I think it's completely IPO or nothing. Um, it's a pretty big bet with a lot of money.
Anything else caught your attention this week, Matt?
No, I have been very not caught up on all my reading, but that one I saw that one on so many different things that it was impossible not to catch my attention. I wasn't even trying to read, and I got wind of that one.
New Docker Hub rate limits went in yesterday. Anybody have a
Oh, they
problem?
did. Did you happen to feel it firsthand?
Not directly, but a previous coworker of mine hit me up this morning and mentioned, "Oh yeah, it hit us again." It's like, all right, every time they raise that bar, it's
Yeah,
like 100 pulls for every 6 hours if you're unauthenticated now. It's pretty stingy.
yeah, definitely worth trying to just move off. At this point, I think it's just find alternative sources for anything you depend that's on Docker Hub.
Yeah, especially now that Google has their public kind of pull through cache. It's I don't know
They have
why you
a
would just Docker
public
Hub.
pool. Oh, yeah. So like public.aws.ecr, Google has theirs.
Yeah,
Hmm. What is Google's public one?
it's like MCR or something like that. See if I can find the link. I know GitLab was making a pretty big fuss about the Docker rate limits.
I think it's just mirror.gcr.io. I think that's
That's what the M is. Yeah.
I think so.
So yeah, so the pull-through cache for public.aws.ecr is very limited. It's only specific popular projects on the Docker registry or possibly some other registries as well. Is the Google Cloud Mirror broader? For example, any public?
Yeah, that's my understanding. So if you read,
Oh,
if
sorry, yeah.
go to the page that I just posted in chat, and I think that gives you the explanation of how the thing works. I don't know if you clicked on it, but it might be in another window if you did.
Oh, yeah, no, it is, but there's another Arc oddity. Okay. Artifact caches.
Yeah, so it's just designed to be a pull-through cache specifically for Docker Hub,
Hmm.
which if you've got the scale that Google has, I'm sure it's pretty well populated.
Mm-hmm. Is it any image at Docker Hub?
It says frequently used images, so
Yeah.
it's kind of ambiguous on what happens, but I guess it's probably frequently used by anyone on Google, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's all tied into Google
I
Cloud.
mean,
So
this actually makes sense for them to do this too, because they probably, they save all the bandwidth exchange between them and
Yeah.
wherever Docker Hub is, as well, right? So they pull it once from them and then they can serve it on their own network over and over again.
yeah, the nice thing is it's automatically built into their Kubernetes engine too, instead of like EKS where you got to hack it into the worker nodes.
Yeah. That's interesting. I guess with the admission controller, one could maybe rewrite everything automatically that's on Docker Hub to this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
But
think,
you don't even need to rewrite it because it's just a
right.
registry here. So
Oh, it's built into the protocol. Got it. Yep.
yeah, whatever container engine you're using as Docker or
Yeah.
ones it'll check the mirror first.
Good tip. Just posting that internally here. Any other cool, good tips? So I'll take this opportunity then to introduce something. I believe it's available as a release candidate right now. We haven't actually cut the release for it, but it merged this past week, which is list values, which is this PR. We've been working on it for some time. There's a lot of work that went into it to get it right. 182 commits later. But if you're using Atmos, this is really nice because we extended the list functionality in a very dynamic, flexible way. So you can create your own configuration to basically list your stack configuration however you want to do it. And we call it list values to be generic so that it's however you want to structure it. Right now, you can only have one view of that. I could imagine us supporting multiple views of it down the road, but you can configure exactly the columns that you want to display when you run Atmos list values. Then we also have some baked in versions of that to list your metadata, which is a property of stacks, and to list just the variables, for example. Those are some shortcuts. So you can run Atmos list settings, Atmos list vars, Atmos list metadata, and then Atmos list values, which is just totally open-ended. And you can then output that as in this pretty format that you see here in the screenshots. That's the default. Or in JSON, YAML, CSV, or TSV. So that can be useful if you want to integrate this with other tooling that's going to operate on the output from that. It supports the query parameter, which we've supported in Atmos describe commands. So you can query using JQ-like syntax or YQ syntax, since this is YAML, across all of your stacks. So the combination of this is really powerful. Display the information any way you want and query the information using the JQ language. This is using Go JQ under the hood, so it's not 100% JQ, but it's close enough. The other thing that we did release was better documentation and enhancements to our bang include function. So what does that mean? So we have this YAML function in our stack configurations called bang include. So YAML functions, just taking a step back, if you're not familiar with the YAML spec, function is a term that we are using to make it more approachable. They're technically called explicit tags. Think of them as typecasting, but it's an official thing in the YAML spec that lets you say the thing that follows this statement is of this type. And then you can define these custom types in your implementation of it. And that's what we've done. And we're calling these functions. So we've implemented this. This has been around for a couple months now, but I think there was some flaws in the initial implementation that I'll get to in a second. So with the bang include, the idea is that you can now import YAML, HCL, JSON, text files anywhere in your Atmos stack configurations. So if your configs are getting really complicated or you have a lot of information in there that might be overwhelming to developers, it'd be nice to just put the information that you need to edit routinely maybe into a file. Almost the way that you would use YAML anchors if you're familiar with what those are. So in our first implementation of this, the include function only operated on the final result of your YAML configuration, and that was not the intent, and it didn't work well because you might want to use this multiple times throughout your configurations to augment through inheritance the final shape of the data in your stack configurations. So with the way it works now, this is really awesome because now you can adopt any legacy Terraform project more or less into Atmos stack configurations, provided that you're following a common pattern when using Terraform. If you're using a var file for every environment, like a var file for dev, a var file for prod, a var file for staging, you can now do like something like this, which we see all the time. You can now tie that into Atmos and start importing all those Terraform, all that Terraform code into Atmos without having to also import the variables into the YAML stack configuration and so forth. This is nice because developers can be accustomed to those TFR files. Maybe you have certain lint rules on those or other processes that create those var files, or it's just more familiar to you. Crawl, walk, run. So in this situation, you can now define your stacks for the component. This is the Terraform root module, and then the vars where it should get the variables for that component. And now you can start leveraging all the functionality that you get from Atmos out of the box. The ability to list those values that I was showing you, the ability to start inheriting things if you want to. And this is what I mean by the crawl, walk, run. You can start using Atmos without changing too much regarding your usage of Terraform. And now you can start leveraging bits and pieces of Atmos as you gain more confidence in what this framework provides to you. The other cool thing about include is that you can include remote sources. So if there's a static JSON file or YAML file somewhere and you want to use that as part of your configuration, you can do that. And under the hood, we automatically inject the GitHub token into that request if it's a request to GitHub and if the GitHub token is available, so that it can pull from private repos or avoid rate limits. It works really well inside of GitHub Actions, for example. The second argument here is a YQ expression so that you can load that file and take some part of that file and inject that into the YAML as well. So really powerful functionality. I'll just provide a bunch of examples of how you might do that. Here's an example, pulling like values from a remote GitHub raw URL. Any questions on that or other news?
I had a really minor other news item. Just I
Yeah,
thought
go
was
for it.
interesting. So if you open the link that I just dropped in chat, I noticed that Amazon started publishing the actual geographical location of all of their availability zones. So see that third column?
Mm.
Like that never used to be there before.
Mm.
So now they actually are telling you where in the world physically all these availability zones are.
But yeah, I guess down to nation precision.
In some other places, it's a little bit more specific, I think, or
Oh yeah, in
maybe,
the US, it's down to the state.
yeah. I thought I saw another one when I was looking through it that had, no, I guess not. Maybe over time they'll start to fill in more over that. Like, for instance, like India is a pretty big country, so I think, it would be interesting to know, as is, China or whatever. Like,
But wasn't there a case with availability zones where they're sort of scrambled on the back end, like what's presented on the front end? Like my US East 1 AZ, A is different. It might be your B, so that if we both pick A, we're not both picking the same data center. Is that not the case, or maybe am I misunderstanding that?
I think it's those sub things, how they have like um what do they call, I forget, they have another term for it internally, but I think like the availability zone is the availability zone. Because I think that maps to, like, as an example, when you go look at um like Virginia there in US East one, there's like 6 availability zones, and I'm pretty sure those are like either 5 or 6 distinct data centers that they maintain in Virginia
Hmm.
that are all within like I don't know, like a half-hour drive of one another. But those are all, I think, like those refer to a physical data center.
Yeah, some of the AZs are in the same building, but they're still isolated. But yeah, the
Yeah,
mapping is still there for sure. That's how
yeah,
fun
but
trying to map up match up different accounts.
yeah, I think US East 1 might be the one that, like, I think there's only two availability zones that are in the same data center. I remember reading this somewhere, so don't quote me on it as being 100% accurate or anything, but I think it's like 2 of them are in the same building, but then they acquired a bunch of other data centers and connected them with like dark fiber and everything else. And uh when my kids were playing soccer tournaments down in Virginia one time, I actually tried to take a driving tour of several of them, and I found like 3 or 4 of the actual like Amazon data centers. But and they were all like, miles apart from each other, some up to like a half hour like between the 2 of them. So but I don't know like their entire geography, all around, if they've continued to do that, or like they co-locate availability zones in the same data center in many other regions, I'm sure.
Can someone revise my recollection? I mean, I know historically availability zones were not the same per account and were randomized in an effort to kind of distribute workloads getting provisioned across regions. So things weren't just defaulted to AZ, the first AZ, so to say. I thought that maybe they stopped doing that, or that you could now pin it on a per account basis. Anyone know more about that than me?
I think when you create certain resources, you can pick which availability zones they go into.
Right, but
Right.
AZ US East 1A in account A would be a different US East 1A in account B could be, and that they weren't the same. That, at least in the origin of AWS, that was the case, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think
that,
that's what Michael was just saying
yeah,
too.
that's what I was asking. I think that's how it used to be. Maybe they're getting away from that, but yeah, I think it was to like prevent a thundering herd or whatever, everybody
Yeah.
lamping onto one zone or something like that. Just like you said, kind of spreads everything out a little bit across the different data centers.
So I know that, yeah, and I thought that's what you were saying, but I was listening for something else. Was that they either stopped doing that or that you can pin it now based on something, so you can ensure that AZs are consistent across accounts and VPCs.
And not that I'm seeing, they do have an architecture where you can actually do a mapping and have a service that figures out how to translate across accounts, which AZ is which. I haven't seen whether you can actually pin it.
It's interesting.
Hey guys, can you hear me? No.
Yep.
Yeah. Got a story to share, maybe or ask if you had the experience regarding AWS data sync. So we had actually kind of story because we try to use it. We use it. We've been using that for nearly 2 years to push on-prem files to S3 and kind of been working successfully. And we now trying to connect Azure to AWS and push files from Azure to AWS. And initially we're trying NFS, then SMB, and then the blob files, everything possible. And each time we're getting run host ID. So after kind of exhausting all the possible options to raise the ticket with the AWS, and surprisingly, they found the issue on their side. So apparently it's a known issue with the Azure firewalls when you send them FQDN and they route it wrongly, or the routing back doesn't work on AWS. But they said they cannot, so they couldn't give me the bug number or anything, but they said, oh, do you want me to just disable FQDN routing, but then you may break your on-prem transfers. So we have chosen different region to deal with that. It's kind of still getting fixed and try to get information from them. Why is it kind of not published and why they say they support Azure if it's not really working for the data sync. So that's kind of, we wonder if anyone else had experience Azure to AWS, maybe any other kind of known bugs or issues where it should work but it doesn't.
Not something we've had to deal with too much. At Cloud Posse, we're not doing too much on-prem to AWS or multi-cloud. Sounds frustrating though.
Yeah, but it's interesting that you know they say on the paper it's supported, and then they actually couldn't tell me if it's something recent on Azure side that kind of broke this because you know, and also it'd be challenging when you try to deploy this AWS data sync agent, which is a virtual appliance. It's Linux, but it relies on you to use console to configure it. And as we know, there's no console on Azure. And they were promising that for years, and it's still not there. As you have to use serial console and kind of hack to redirect serial, enable diagnostic, and be able to do anything. So it's a challenge to just pass that step, and then it connects everything. But yeah, at the end, you find out you just got a message from host ID, which not very useful. Too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you cracked the nut. It's just deploy Lambda here, Jonathan, to figure out to do zone pinning.
Lambdas and SSM parameters all the way.
Yeah. I think I would be okay with it if they just packaged it up differently, so it didn't feel like such an apparatus every time. All right. Any other topics for discussion today?
Yeah, I had one thing to share. I just shared a link to a GitHub repo. It's just kind of a toy app that I put together out of frustration for having to work with modules. And I mean, you guys could probably say, hey, this is something that Atmos can take care of, but I've got a library of modules and I'm instantiating them, as I'm putting them together. And I just got tired of manually coding out the module and putting in the values for the variables because these modules are very opinionated, so the defaults are usually pretty good, and it doesn't take a lot to configure them. It's just kind of a pain to have to look at the variables, create the module, update the source, et cetera, et cetera. So I made this little Python script that just reads the file. And I shouldn't even say I made it. I actually use AI to generate a lot of this code, right? But I was wondering if anybody had a similar tool that basically looks at a module, and I use the variables file as sort of the interface to the module, and then creates an instantiation of that module.
You are literally calling Terraform apply on it?
No, not at all. This is all Python. It just reads the variables
No,
file.
no, no. An instance, what does instance mean in this context?
Yeah, if you scroll down in this particular, like on this screen, this example shows the variables file that is being read in.
But is a module instance a configuration of a root module with its variables, or is it the next step beyond that, where that module is also provisioned?
It's the next step. Yeah. So, and that's what I say. If you scroll down to the very bottom of this page, and you'll see where I'm taking this variables file, that's just above there, and I'm creating the module where I'm instantiating this resource, whatever that module does. In this case, I just use VPC as an example, this simple VPC interface.
Interesting.
But there's a really cool package, a Python library called HCL2 that it basically reads HCL, and you can do a whole lot of stuff for it. It gives you a nice object. It's mostly JSON, basically, a JSON object of all the features of the code, like the resources, variables and their assignments, and so on and so on. And then you can use that to do whatever you want to. And I want to update the script to use that. I just, hadn't had the time. But before I went that far, I was just going to ask if anybody else had something similar that was doing anything like this.
So so this here would be a container that has this root module, and when you and you specify which root module you want to apply, essentially.
Well, no, not at all. So the Docker file or the container is really just reading the variables file from a module. Like, say if I had a GitHub repository with 20 root modules in it, or not even root modules, but like resource modules, like totally opinionated, highly configured. All you really have to do is give it a name and maybe, like in this case, it just needs the VPC ID that it's pulling the data from. But I don't want to write that bottom paragraph. I don't want to write that at all. So the script reads the variables file and spits this part out, and I just kind of plug and chug from
Okay,
there.
I got you. Yeah.
One of the places I used to work at, we had a developer try to do this with Java, and they were trying to actually do real-time generated Terraform code based on modules. And it was interesting, but we had some pretty complex variables with object mappings and different levels of values, and it kind of fell apart once we got to the more complex stuff. But it was interesting.
Yeah, and I can totally agree with that because this very naive approach, it doesn't work very well with complex variables, particularly object maps or list maps and that type of stuff. But I know that the HCL module or HCL library for Python, it'll do a better job of picking those types of things up, and then basically just spitting it back out if it's a default. Like I said, I just haven't had the time to pull that into the code.
what is your personal driver for being able to automate this right now? Is it something that you
Um,
run manually, or is something you would run through automation?
it's something that I would run manually. Like, so if I'm pulling together a a a collection of modules that work together. So in this case, this for this example, this VPC module, it doesn't create a VPC, but it reads the subnets for a VPC and then kind of spits them out as output, makes them available to other modules. So then I would have my ECS module or something like that, my database module, and it's taking input from this VPC module. So I would take this process basically and point it at the variables file for the VPC, point it at the variables file for the database module, point it at the variables file for the ECS module, and it gives me all these top level calls to the module that I then instantiate in my completed
Yeah.
application.
So you put it in your root module. This is
Yeah,
basically helping you compose a root module
exactly,
from a
exactly.
list of submodules. Yeah, child modules. Okay, that makes sense. Out of curiosity, are you using a lot of cursor these days, Michael?
I am actually, yeah. For this particular one, I want to say I did it directly in the Claude interface.
Mm-hmm.
But I am using Cursor quite a bit for code refactoring. Um, One really cool example that I did yesterday, I actually had to create a VPC module that actually, generates the VPC itself, the subnets, and so on. And I was messing around with the CIDR ranges for the subnets that I wanted to create, and I just highlighted and I suck at creating networks. I totally appreciate network engineers and what they do. And just, I mean, little tangent sidebar. I've worked in environments where we couldn't create our own VPCs. They were given to us, and then we
Yeah.
just kind of operate within that sort of that fenced off area, which is fine by me because I don't want to break anything, right? So I was creating a VPC module, but I couldn't for the life of me dial in the CIDR ranges. So I just highlighted the CIDR ranges that I created. And I said, hey, AI, can you update these CIDR ranges so that they're correct and they give me like the correct number of IPs that I need in this particular subnet or whatever? And it did it, and it saved me a bunch of time because the first thing I started to do was go to a CIDR calculator. And I was like, wait a minute, there's got to be a better way than actually putting each of these ranges, because hey, I was working in US East 1. There's 5 availability zones. I wanted CIDR ranges in each availability zone for my subnets, public and private. So I just highlighted all of that code and I was like, fix it. And it did it perfectly.
Yeah. That makes sense. And yeah, using it a lot the same way. I'm just curious. I'm not doing personally as much the Terraform. I'm wondering how well it would auto-complete this kind of thing in Cursor if
Well,
it knew. Yeah.
one
Matt?
of the things I was going to bring up just related to that is that the VS Code plugin that talks to the Terraform language server actually does a fair amount of this, where you can point to the module and then it will actually show you like all the properties that are available. They have a thing now called, I think, the module browser or something that's built into the VS Code plugin, that you can actually browse like um you can actually browse any module and it will show you like all the properties and um all of that kind of stuff, and then you can just kind of like drop it in. And then also when you say module quote, it will or module quote, you give it the name and then you give it the path to a module, it will then automatically give you like everything else. There it is. It's the second one from the bottom, Terraform Module Explorer. That's the
Mm,
thing I was thinking of. So you can actually see all the calls and then that you're making, and when you go to that, it shows, if you open any of them, it shows you
mm,
like the details of that thing. But what my main point on the module side of things is that it does a really good job of showing you what all the properties are that you can set and all that through like IntelliSense.
Can it tab complete though? Like, for example, all the required arguments? in the
I
same
think there's
way that what Michael's doing here in his script?
Yeah, I think there is like something that gives you that when you drop it in. I know if you create a resource, it for sure automatically adds those for you. Like
Yeah.
if you do resource quote whatever, and then the modules, I think there's something in there for the modules to I think it will show you like it's squiggly, like it will be squiggly if you don't provide um all the required things, and I think they have whatever those code completion things are, like the little light bulb you can click on and say fix, and it will automatically then like copy in all the properties that are missing basically, and then you can just fill them out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be enough for me because then I could just type module, in this case, VPC, open bracket, close bracket, and then if
You
I
have
get
to
that
tell it
light
the
bulb,
source too. That's
okay,
it
okay, got
basically.
it.
Yeah. And then
Yeah,
once you
well,
get the source, then you can then basically it will tell you that.
yeah, and that's the same thing I'm doing on with this particular Docker call because I do give it the well, and I shouldn't say it's a requirement. It really is just kind of it fills in the blank for me, so I don't have to manually put it in when I'm writing the code. But yeah, if I just typed it out, just the same as I was typing on the command line, and then the open back bracket, close bracket, and if it was smart enough to say, "Hey, you got to fill in all these things," then that might be enough for me.
And a cursor rule file,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
everything in between.
Yeah. I mean, in this case, that's like even over engineering it. I think you can just rely on the LSP to do the work for you. Like the language server will essentially just
Hmm.
tell you you haven't provided all the required properties, and then it has that little fix with I forget what they call those things, like code lenses or something that you can drop it on, and then it will write in all the properties that are missing, and then you just have to provide the values.
Hmm. All right. Other interesting topics, questions, things you're working through.
Sorry, the one thing I wanted to add to that is the only caveat with that whole thing is that you have to run Terraform init for all the modules that you load. Like I think you can tell it to run Terraform init or something, but like it can't read all the modules obviously until they've been downloaded.
Oh, it's downloaded, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the catch 22, I think, on that one.
One thing I've really loved in VS Code with writing GitHub action workflows is how it automatically knows the valid inputs for remote GitHub actions in your workflows, and there's obviously no initialization required for that. It just knows where to fetch it.
Yeah, I mean, that's just a function of how GitHub Actions work, right? Versus
Right,
Terraform.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I would say it's a choice of implementation that you have to download the module to know the variables when you could just look at the variables remotely. But I guess
Well,
any
it
file,
depends.
yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what your remote source is,
Mhm.
right? So if it's like an OCI image or something, like you can't just necessarily read from that, or if it's, a tarball or whatever.
Speaking of which, Open Tofu's making progress on the POC for OCI support for Terraform modules. Be nice. I saw them literally commenting on some issues related to auras, which is a popular library for working with OCI. So I think they're actually starting some development work.
Yeah, it looks they closed the RFC,
Mhm.
and then it looks like they're starting to implement it. Or not closed it, but accepted the current state of it.
That'll be super nice. But yeah, just further fracturing Terraform. going to be interesting how to support it moving forward. Do we need a TypeScript for Terraform to generate the right version of Terraform code based on which version of Terraform distribution you're using?
It's just some, like code generation.
Yeah.
Well, without getting too into it, HashiCorp / IBM are recruiting for a engineering manager to oversee all of Terraform community and the SaaS platform.
Oh, interesting.
To talk about how to better enhance but one of the things is how to better enhance the community engagement and support and unify that with the paid offerings. So it'll be interesting to see who takes that role and how they deal with the community.
Yeah. Well, it looks like we are at time for today. Thanks everyone for participating in Office Hours. We'll be posting a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. This video will be there in a few hours, and you'll find all of our past episodes there as well. If you're curious how Cloud Posse can help level up the Terraform game at your company, reach out to me directly. Go to cloudposse.com/meet. Answer a few quick questions, and you'll book a meeting with me directly. To get more involved in our community and what we're doing at Cloud Posse, join us in Slack at slack.cloudposse.com. You can listen to these office hours also as a podcast. We just syndicate it out directly. And if you haven't yet registered for our weekly office hours, these are live sessions. Anyone can join. You just need to register. Go to cloudposse.com/office hours to register. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week and talk to you next week.